Will Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals extend their 7-game win streak against the Bills tonight? That and more today on Showdown Coverage, brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde. We'll get right into the DraftKings slate. So we have Buffalo heading to Cincinnati as 1-point favorites in this one, so we really don't have a lean on who we should be heavily stacking. Obviously, 3-3 is going to be the most common scenario. I tend to try to pick a team and stick with them. This week, it's going to be probably 4, maybe sometimes 5 players from Buffalo. But I think I do want to get a good bit of exposure to Joe Burrow still and just kind of maybe get unique with who I stack him with. So Josh Allen's the most expensive player on the slate at 11,400. And he's got the highest ceiling as well. So it makes perfect sense. You're not getting too much of a price discount on Joe Burrow. It's pretty much just the difference in rushing upside between Joe Burrow and Josh Allen in terms of points per dollar. So really no big difference on whether you're going with Allen or Burrow. I like to play both if I can. But that means that you're going to be more expensive on the Cincinnati side when you have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, all much more expensive than their Bills counterparts. So Joe Burrow makes a ton of sense too, and it's fine if you want to stack Cincinnati. It's just a little tougher to heavily stack Cincinnati and then add Josh Allen than it is to heavily stack Buffalo and then add Joe Burrow. So that brings us to Jamar Chase, 10,600. He's averaging about 11 targets a game. Well worth the price. One of the higher ceilings of the slate, probably the highest ceiling outside of the two quarterbacks, and going to be highly owned. Probably relatively close to 50%, which means Stephon Diggs at 10,400 should come in lower than normal, even though he's cheaper than normal. So Stephon Diggs is someone we've seen at like 12,400 in the past, and we're getting him at 10,400 because he has had 3 games that have been relatively disappointing. He did hit the 100-yard bonus 4 weeks ago, if I recall correctly, but it has been a little bit of time since we've seen dominant Stephon Diggs. If we're going to heavily invest in Josh Allen, we're probably going to want to heavily invest in Stephon Diggs as well. I'd say if I'm in 20 max, I'm probably going 50% Diggs, 100% Allen. That brings us to T. Higgins, who's averaging about 8 targets compared to Jamar Chase's 11. He's shown similar ceiling. It's not nearly as often as Jamar Chase, so he's a little bit riskier and he will be less owned even though he is cheaper. So T. Higgins at 9,800 is a nice stacking option with Joe Burrow. What we're really looking for here when we go 4-2 with the Buffalo is that Joe Burrow locks onto one of his targets and they have a big day. 2 touchdowns from Chase, 2 from Higgins. Either or would be fantastic when we consider that we're going for 4 members of the Buffalo offense paired with Joe Burrow and 1 pass catcher. But the other approach you could take is Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon might be the most important player of the slate for us because if we're going for 4 players from Buffalo, there's only 2 avenues to that succeeding. It's either Cincinnati doesn't score a lot of points, which I don't see happening under really any circumstance, or Joe Mixon has a big day on the ground. So since I'm not buying that Cincinnati might not score points, I will be heavily invested in Joe Mixon and hoping that he punches in 1, 2, hits a 100-yard bonus, something like that, so that it caps the upside of Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and even Joe Burrow. I have toyed with some lineups that include Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon, kind of the same situation we've played in the past with Justin Herbert and Austin Eckler, where you're just like, okay, well, hopefully I just get a piece of all the points. That could work too. They're cheap enough to where that still fits. But what mostly is going to make it fit is the next tier of players we're going to talk about for Buffalo: Devin Singletary and James Cook. We could talk about at the same time. We're looking at nearly 50-50. It's actually more 60-40 right now for Devin Singletary and James Cook, but the opportunity share has been about the same over the last 2 weeks. So I think this might be the first week we see James Cook have more snaps than Devin Singletary. They're both good pivot options. They both should be under 30% ownership just because people will be playing a lot of Buffalo, but they're not going to be playing Buffalo rushing attack. And a lot of people are going to be doing the opposite of what I'm saying to do. They're going to be playing 4 members of Cincinnati and then 2 from Buffalo. So if you're going 2 from Buffalo, you're thinking like Josh Allen and Khalil Shakir or something like that, probably not playing any of the running backs. But since we're going 4 from Buffalo, it affords us the opportunity to stack the running backs. So Devin Singletary at 7,000, he's fine. He'll probably be about 25% owned. He'll get about 13, 14 carries, maybe a target, maybe 2. Nothing too exciting. I think James Cook is a lot more exciting, even though they're both viable, just because he has that $1,400 discount and will get pretty much the same workload. And like I mentioned earlier, has an outside shot to actually overtake the backfield. And if not this week, I do think he will do it by the playoffs. So I'd like to be a little bit early on James Cook, who has already made us money on showdown slates, if I recall correctly. Gabe Davis is another great one. Gabe Davis was an $8,800 player earlier in the year, and we've seen he's been relatively disappointing on the season, depending on what your expectations were. But at 6,400, he makes a lot of sense for us trying to play Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, a lot of the expensive Cincinnati players in our Buffalo stacks. Gabe Davis helps a lot at 6,400, especially if you're not in on Stephon Diggs. Gabe Davis is the type of wide receiver that negatively correlates with his other wide receivers because he limits drives. Ends them quickly with his long touchdown reception. So if Gabe Davis can get one or two long ones, which we've seen in the past, that would definitely cap Diggs' upside and definitely cap the upside of some of the lesser tiered wide receivers. So in situations where we have like James Cook at captain or Devin Singletary at captain, I think Gabe Davis makes a ton of sense with Josh Allen, and then maybe a kicker or the Bills defense, who we will get to soon. One topic we need to discuss is Tyler Boyd and Trenton Irwin. Crazy that we need to discuss that, but Trenton Irwin actually, I believe, took over snap share with Tyler Boyd last week, and he's had 3 touchdowns in the last few weeks, 2 touchdowns last game. He's only 4,400 as opposed to Tyler Boyd's 5,000. But what I fear here is that the two players kind of just vulture each other's opportunities, and neither of them are terribly viable in their price range. Large field, 150 max stuff, sure. It's worth including both of them just because if you're trying to get 4 Bengals in your lineup, you're going to need either Tyler Boyd, Trenton Irwin, or Hayden Hurst. But I like Hayden Hurst more than both of them, just straight up, and he offers a price discount. Not to mention that Dawson Knox and Samaje Perine are both in the same price range as Tyler Boyd and Trenton Irwin, and I like them both a lot more too. Dawson Knox much more. So Dawson Knox is averaging, I think, 6 or 7 targets over the last 3 games. He's really come on lately after a disappointing start to the year. And he's another Buffalo player that helps our lineups make a lot more sense. If we could get 4 of these value guys in with Josh Allen, or three value guys plus Josh Allen, we can get Joe Burrow, we can get Jamar Chase in our lineups. And if Jamar Chase does have that blow up like 200-yard game, we're still in it with our valuable Buffalo players. Not to mention, if we're stacking these value plays for Buffalo, they're going to have to pass more. They've been rushing at league average over the last 3 weeks. After most of the year, they were one of the league leaders, like top 10 in pass rate. They're actually league average in pass rate the last 3 weeks. So they want to run as of late. And if we can get them, Cincinnati, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase stacked to hit, then they're going to have to pass more than they would like to as of late. Kickers defense, plenty viable. Kickers will be popular. They always are on slates where the total's high, even though I'm surprised we don't have over a 50-point total. I guess that's a testament to the two defenses actually playing pretty well recently as well. But kickers are viable, but they'll also be more owned than normal. Defense is what I like to target in these high-scoring games because people just associate high-scoring games with poor defense, but defense doesn't really correlate to any game environment. It's just honestly, it's as close to luck as we get in showdown is defensive scoring. We saw if you played the Packers 4 p.m. slate the other day, I mean, they just stole the whole slate because they had 2 defensive touchdowns. They had a bunch of interceptions, things like that. Nobody played them. They were like 8% owned. So it can happen. It's just fluky when it can happen. So your best bet is to just play defense when they're going to be low owned and fade them when they're going to be high owned. Hayden Hurst at 3,000 is probably our favorite salary relief option. What I really like to do is get in on some of those. If you want to include Stephon Diggs, which means you're not going to get in on Gabe Davis or Dawson Knox, one or the other, then Hayden Hurst helps a lot. So one stack option you could do is play some of the expensive players for the Bills and then stack Joe Burrow with Hayden Hurst. That makes it a lot of sense. Hayden Hurst was injured last week, which led to Mitchell Wilcox playing 90% of the snaps and getting 9 targets. But Hayden Hurst 2 weeks ago played 90% of the snaps himself, and I think he had 8 targets. So he will be plenty involved when he's healthy. We'll talk about Mitchell Wilcox in a moment, and maybe he keeps a role. But the last big decision point we have is Isaiah McKenzie, Cole Beasley, and Khalil Shakir. We'll start with Cole Beasley because he's the easiest. His first week back, I think he had 18% snap share, and then it dropped down to 9% snap share. I think he's been targeted twice in 2 games, so I really am not too worried about Cole Beasley. He doesn't make a lot of sense at his price given the other options, so we can just take him out of consideration. That leaves Isaiah McKenzie and Khalil Shakir. So McKenzie played less snaps than Shakir for one of the first times this year last week, but still out-targeted him, I think, 2-1. So McKenzie's still plenty viable at 2,800, especially somebody who was schemed for earlier in the year, somebody who's been heavily involved very often, but he will be higher owned, I believe. So if Isaiah McKenzie at 2,800 is playing the same amount of snaps, got about the same opportunity for targets as Khalil Shakir, and might be higher owned just because people think that he's too cheap, which he is too cheap relative to some of the games we've seen from him earlier in the season, then that leaves the door open for Khalil Shakir. So maybe Khalil Shakir can lead the wide receiver 3 position in snaps again this week, and he would be one of the better punt plays of the slate. Mitchell Wilcox is the last player we're going to talk about. He is 1,800. He's sandwiched right between Shakir and McKenzie, so he feels like a really good option for like sub 5% ownership, and we really just don't know what his snap share is going to go back to after 9 targets last week because Hayden Hurst is back. So do they divvy it up 50-50? Do they give 90% back to Hurts? We really don't know, but it's worth in large field tournaments taking a shot on Wilcox when there's not a whole heck of a lot of punt options. So let's get into a couple builds here. So what I'm looking at this week is some large field stuff. Usually we do small field stuff, so we stick to like the primary scorers as our captains. But with so many large field tournaments in the lobby right now, we're going to go with some large field builds. So that means I'm looking at Dawson Knox, Gabe Davis, and James Cook. I'm going to start with a Gabe Davis lineup. So we're going to put Gabe Davis in at captain. Josh Allen goes with Gabe Davis. We want to play Joe Burrow pretty often. If you're not playing Joe Burrow, play Joe Mixon. I think it is a one or the other type situation. I think you should have at least one or even both for maybe a little more uniqueness and hope that Joe Mixon just catches a touchdown like Najee Harris did last night. Now, with Gabe Davis a captain, like I said earlier, you're probably not going to want to go with Stephon Diggs. So we're going to go down to James Cook, and then we're going to go to Dawson Knox, and we're going to see how much money we have left over. So that leaves us with 7,800. We could play Singletary with James Cook here, but we need a stacking option with Joe Burrow. So that's going to leave us with like maybe Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd would be fine. Trenton Irwin would be fine. Samaje Perine would even be interesting. Hayden Hurst would leave a ton of salary on the table. So lots of different options to do here when you've got Gabe Davis a captain, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, James Cook, Dawson Knox, and you have 7,800 to do whatever you want, preferably play a Cincinnati player. I would not play Joe Burrow by himself. So anyone from Cincinnati under 7,800. Another thing you can do is take Gabe Davis out of captain, swap James Cook into captain, Gabe Davis in the flex, and then that leaves you 8,200. It doesn't really get you to anybody else, though. The one thing that you would have to do with this lineup that I'll do right now is you have to swap Dawson Knox to like Khalil Shakir or Isaiah McKenzie. We'll do Shakir just for the best example. So now we're at James Cook captain, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Gabe Davis, Khalil Shakir, and now you have 12,200. And this is perfect for like a 20 max or even a 3 max because you can fit every player on the slate. So you could fit Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon. So you could just go with this framework here. I probably would want to go back to Gabe Davis here. So let's go Gabe Davis at captain. Back to James Cook in the flex. So you've got Gabe Davis, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, James Cook, Khalil Shakir, and enough money for every single player on the slate to round out your roster. I would play 3 max of this in large field and play like 1 Chase, 1 Higgins, 1 Mixon, or something like that. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you all so much for coming out. This has been Showdown Coverage brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, and I'll catch you all next week.